Kellen Hayes was a man who had everything: wealth, power, and success. At 35, he had built an empire from the ground up, a multi-billion-dollar tech company that had made him one of the most sought-after men in New York. His penthouse in downtown Manhattan was as sleek and modern as his lifestyle, complete with a view of the city skyline that could make anyone envious. He had everything he wanted, and more importantly, he had complete control over every aspect of his life. Love, relationships, and emotions. Those were distractions, and Kellen had no time for them. That's why when his assistant handed him the invitation to yet another high society charity event, Kellen had barely looked up from his desk. He was the CEO. He was busy. But he knew the drill. The event was important for networking, making connections, and maintaining the image of a successful billionaire. So, he'd play his part, like always. He'd show up, shake a few hands, donate generously, and disappear back into his world of board meetings and product launches. But when he walked into the grand ballroom of the venue, he immediately knew something was different. The room was filled with the usual crowd, wealthy businessmen and socialites dressed in sparkling gowns and tailored suits, but his attention wasn't on any of them. It was on a woman standing by the far corner of the room. She wasn't fawning over the event, wasn't clutching a glass of champagne or making small talk with the others. Instead, she stood there, an aura of quiet confidence surrounding her. Her black dress clung to her figure with effortless elegance, the kind of simplicity that caught Kellen's eye in a room full of over-the-top glamour. Her dark hair cascaded in soft waves around her shoulders, and her posture was poised yet relaxed. But it was her eyes that drew him in, the cool, serene blue that seemed to pierce right through the shallow conversations going on around her. She wasn't part of the crowd. She was an enigma in the midst of it all. Curiosity gnawed at him. He found himself pushing through the crowd, sidestepping the small talk and the familiar faces, until he was standing in front of her. She hadn't noticed him approach, her gaze still fixed on the distant city lights through the glass wall. He cleared his throat, and she finally turned to face him. Her eyes flicked over him briefly, calculating, but not impressed. "Hi," Kellen said, offering a smooth smile that had made him many connections in the past. "I don't think I've seen you around before." Her lips twitched slightly, like she was resisting the urge to laugh. She took a slow sip from her drink before answering. "That's because I tend to avoid events like this." Kellen raised an eyebrow. Most people in his circle thrived on these gatherings, using them as a platform to climb higher. He had always been surrounded by people eager to network and climb the social ladder. But this woman? She was different. "Then why come tonight?" he asked, genuinely curious. "You must have a good reason." Her gaze held his, and for a moment, there was silence. She didn't answer right away, as if she were considering how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke again, her tone calm but with an edge of mystery. "Because sometimes, it's good to step outside my usual circle and remind myself that there's more to life than business cards and handshakes," she said, her words deliberate. Kellen felt a flicker of surprise. She wasn't impressed by the usual trappings of wealth and power. She wasn't even pretending to be interested. And it intrigued him more than he cared to admit. "Fair enough," Kellen said, trying to regain his composure. "I suppose there are a few other things to enjoy in life, if you know where to look." She studied him for a moment, her gaze calculating yet warm. "I suppose so. Though, I'm not sure if this event qualifies as one of those things." Kellen chuckled, genuinely entertained by her bluntness. "Touché. But I do hope the night isn't entirely wasted. I'm Kellen, by the way." Her eyes flicked to his outstretched hand, but she didn't immediately take it. Instead, she raised her chin slightly as if weighing the gesture. "Lila," she replied, finally accepting his handshake. Her grip was firm, confident. Lila Donovan. Her name lingered in his mind as she spoke it, simple but striking. He didn't know why, but it felt like a name he should remember. "So, Lila, Kellen said with a smile, his curiosity piqued, "What brings you to an event like this, if you don't mind me asking?" She raised an eyebrow at him, and for a moment, Kellen wondered if he had crossed a line. Most people would be quick to answer, eager to fill the silence with pleasantries. But Lila simply tilted her head, considering his question with a quiet intensity. "I come when I feel it's worth my time," she said slowly, her voice measured. "But it's not the usual crowd I seek out. I tend to prefer people who know how to listen, not just talk." Kellen's grin widened. This woman, this Lila Donovan, was not what he had expected. She wasn't fawning over him like the other women in the room, eager to impress him. She wasn't interested in his wealth or status. There was no agenda. Just conversation. "I think I'd like to get to know you more, Lila," Kellen said, his voice a little more serious than he intended. "But if you're not interested in the usual charades, then I suggest we get out of here." She raised her glass to her lips, considering him. The silence between them was thick with an unspoken understanding. Finally, she nodded, her smile faint but real. "All right," she said. "But don't expect me to be impressed by your penthouse or your bank account. I'm here for something else." Kellen's heart raced at the challenge. "Fair enough," he said. "But I think you'll be surprised. There's more to me than just the business side of things." Her smile deepened, and for a brief moment, Kellen felt something shift in the air between them. The night felt different now, charged with a new energy. He had always been in control, always a step ahead. But with Lila Donovan, he had no idea what was going to happen next. And that, for the first time in years, was exciting. They left the gala together, walking into a new world that neither of them had expected, with Kellen realizing, for the first time, that he was no longer just playing the game. He was in the middle of something real, something unpredictable, and he didn't know if he was ready for it, but he sure as hell wasn't going to turn back. The days following the charity gala felt like a blur for Kellen. Despite his usual control over every aspect of his life, he found himself distracted in a way he hadn't expected. The memory of Lila Donovan lingered in his mind, refusing to fade into the background like the countless women he'd met over the years. There was something about her, something real, that he couldn't shake. It wasn't just her quiet beauty or the way she seemed completely uninterested in impressing him. It was the fact that she had looked right past his wealth and status, not once giving him the usual flattery or superficial admiration. Lila saw him for who he was, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Every time Kellen tried to focus on his work, his thoughts would drift back to her. He thought about their conversation, about the way she spoke so candidly, so freely, as though she had no need to play games. She had listened to him in a way few people ever did. He hadn't expected it, but in those brief moments they shared, it felt like he was finally having a conversation that mattered. There were no business deals being negotiated, no names being dropped, just two people, talking. And that simplicity, that raw honesty, had him thinking about her long after the night ended. It was a Saturday afternoon when he found himself in his office, sitting behind his desk and staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop screen. Work had piled up over the week, and yet, despite his usual efficiency, he couldn't concentrate. All he could think about was Lila. What had happened to her after the gala? Had she gone back to her quiet life, as she had described it? Or had she been swept into the endless cycle of social events and networking that Kellen was so accustomed to? The idea of her fading into the background of his mind, like all the others, didn't sit well with him. There was something about Lila that had stirred something inside him, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He couldn't explain it, but he needed to see her again. He didn't want just another fleeting encounter, he wanted more. Without giving it too much thought, Kellen picked up his phone and dialed the number she had given him. He hesitated for a moment as the call rang, his heart unexpectedly quickening. Lila had been clear that she wasn't interested in anything more than a conversation, but maybe she was open to another one. Maybe he was overthinking this, but he couldn't let it go. He needed to know if there was something more between them or if it had just been a passing moment. The line clicked, and her voice came through, calm but with a hint of surprise. Kellen. Hi, Lila, he said, his voice steady. It's Kellen. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. There was a brief pause before she answered, and Kellen could hear the faint sound of something in the background, a soft noise that indicated she wasn't in a hurry to dismiss him. Not at all. What's up? He could tell that she wasn't annoyed, but there was a casual distance in her tone that made him second-guess his impulsive decision to call her. But he pressed on. I've been thinking about our conversation at the gala. I enjoyed talking with you, and I'd like to do it again. Maybe this time without the crowds. Would you be open to meeting up sometime? Lila was quiet for a few moments, and Kellen wondered if he had misread the whole thing. Maybe she hadn't felt the same connection he had. Maybe she wasn't interested. But then her voice broke the silence, softer than before. I'd like that, she said. I'm not sure when I'll be free, but let me know when works for you. Kellen exhaled, his relief palpable. How about tomorrow? I know a little cafe I think you'd like. No events, no distractions. Just coffee and conversation. What do you say? Lila chuckled lightly, and Kellen could tell that she was warming up to the idea. All right, tomorrow it is. I'm curious now. He smiled, his heart lifting. Great. I'll text you the details later. Looking forward to it. After hanging up, Kellen leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He hadn't expected the call to go as smoothly as it had. For a moment, he felt a sense of uncertainty. Had he pushed too hard? Was this really what he wanted? But deep down, he knew it was the right decision. Lila was different, and he was ready to find out just how much. The next day, as Kellen stood in the cafe waiting for Lila, he tried to calm the nervous energy thrumming through him. He was used to being in control of situations, but for some reason, meeting Lila again felt like stepping into the unknown. There was a quiet anticipation building inside him. He had grown accustomed to the empty interactions of his life, superficial exchanges with people who only saw him for what he had. But Lila was different. She wasn't impressed by his wealth, his status, or his success. She was interested in him, not in the image he had created. And that was what made her so intriguing. When the door opened, Kellen looked up, his breath catching in his throat. There she was. Lila stood in the doorway, her presence almost ethereal. She wore a simple yet elegant coat, her hair tied back loosely, and her expression was as calm as it had been at the gala. She didn't rush toward him, didn't fawn over him, she simply walked over with a quiet grace that only made her more captivating. Hi, Kellen, she said, offering him a small but genuine smile. Hi, he replied, standing up to greet her. I'm glad you could make it. Lila took a seat across from him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was familiar. They had both walked into this meeting with no expectations, but a part of Kellen couldn't help but wonder if this could turn into something more. They ordered their drinks, and as they waited, the conversation flowed naturally. They spoke about books they loved, their favorite spots in the city, and their shared distaste for crowded events. Kellen found himself opening up in a way he hadn't with anyone else. He hadn't realized how much he longed for genuine, meaningful conversation until he had it with her. It wasn't about impressing her, it was about being real. So, tell me about your life outside of work, Lila said, her tone soft but inquisitive. I know the basics, CEO of a major tech company, jet-setting all over the world, but what do you do when you're not working? Kellen paused, surprised by the question. Most people didn't ask him that. Most people were more interested in his business ventures than his personal life. But Lila wasn't like most people. I don't have much of a personal life, he admitted with a small laugh. It's been all work for me for the last few years. But I do enjoy hiking when I have the time. Nature's about the only thing that can get me to unplug for a while. Lila smiled, nodding as if she understood. That sounds nice. I think I could use more of that myself. Sometimes, it feels like life is just one thing after another. But I'm learning how to make space for the things that matter. Kellen leaned in, intrigued by her honesty. That's something I've been trying to figure out too. Balancing everything and still finding time to breathe. The conversation continued, shifting from topic to topic, but it wasn't the words that mattered so much as the connection between them. Kellen felt something inside him stir, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Maybe it was the way Lila listened to him without judgment, or the way she seemed to understand him without needing him to explain every little detail of his life. For the first time in a long time, Kellen felt like he could let his guard down. When they finished their drinks, neither of them seemed in a rush to leave. The time had passed quickly, but the conversation hadn't worn out its welcome. Kellen looked at Lila, feeling a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. He didn't know what he was hoping for from this, whether it was simply another evening of good conversation or the beginning of something more. "I'm glad you came today," Kellen said, his voice soft, his heart beating a little faster than usual. "I didn't expect to find someone who'd make me want to spend more time outside of my own world." Lila's gaze softened, and she smiled. "I'm glad too, Kellen. Maybe this is what we both needed." For a moment, neither of them said anything. And for the first time in his life, Kellen didn't feel the need to rush. Whatever came next, he was ready to find out with Lila. The next few days seemed to stretch on forever for Kellen. Every time he tried to focus on work, his thoughts drifted back to Lila. There was something magnetic about her, something that had intrigued him from the moment they met. He had spent years building his company, achieving success in every corner of the business world, but never once had he allowed himself to truly connect with someone. Yet Lila, quiet, confident, and utterly uninterested in his wealth, had done something to him that he wasn't sure how to explain. Their second meeting had been casual, relaxed, yet there was an intensity beneath the surface that neither of them acknowledged outright. It was the way she had looked at him, like she could see past his wealth and his carefully constructed walls, into something real. He had never been the kind of man to let anyone get close, but with Lila, it felt different. It felt like he didn't have to pretend, like he didn't have to be the version of himself that everyone else saw. Kellen found himself reaching for his phone more often than usual, wanting to text her, wanting to continue their conversation. But he hesitated every time. He wasn't used to this, he wasn't used to wanting more. He was used to controlling everything around him, maintaining a safe distance from anyone who could complicate his life. And yet, here he was, feeling something he hadn't expected, the urge to reach out, to make a connection. Finally, after another long and exhausting day at the office, Kellen sent her a simple text: "Would you like to get dinner tonight? Just the two of us, no distractions." It wasn't anything extravagant, just dinner. He didn't want to overwhelm her, didn't want to seem desperate. He wasn't sure why it mattered so much to him, but the message felt important. He put his phone down, trying to focus on the reports scattered across his desk, but his mind kept drifting back to Lila. A few moments later, his phone buzzed. It was a message from her. "I'd like that. How about 7 p.m. at the new Italian place on 10th? Kellen smiled, his heart lifting. He quickly typed out a reply. "Sounds perfect. I'll see you then." It felt like a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation washed over him. He was looking forward to this more than he had expected, more than he had allowed himself to admit. The hours passed slowly as Kellen made his way through his evening routine, but the moment the clock struck 7 p.m., he found himself walking into the Italian restaurant, a little early, but excited nonetheless. The place had a rustic charm to it, soft candlelight on each table, the scent of freshly baked bread filling the air. It was a warm, inviting place, and Kellen liked the idea of being somewhere that wasn't as cold and impersonal as the usual five-star restaurants he frequented. When Lila walked in, he felt a jolt in his chest. She was dressed simply but beautifully, her hair down in loose waves, a soft burgundy sweater paired with black pants that gave her an effortlessly chic look. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she was just herself. And in that moment, Kellen realized that was exactly what he was drawn to. "Hi," Lila greeted him with a soft smile. "This place is lovely. Thank you for suggesting it." "Of course," Kellen replied, standing up to pull out her chair. "I thought you might appreciate something a little different." She sat down, her eyes meeting his with that same quiet confidence that had intrigued him the first time they met. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the comfortable silence between them speaking volumes. There was something familiar about the way they were together, even though they barely knew each other. The waiter arrived shortly after, offering them menus. Lila ordered a glass of wine, and Kellen did the same, though he didn't usually drink much. It felt different with her, though. The idea of just enjoying the moment, of not rushing through dinner and business like he usually did, made him realize how little he had actually allowed himself to just be. As they waited for their food, Kellen leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So, tell me more about you, Lila. You've been very mysterious so far. You're not like the women I usually meet at these events." Lila raised an eyebrow, the corner of her mouth curving into a teasing smile. "Is that a good thing?" "It's refreshing," Kellen said, his voice soft, thoughtful. "Most people I meet only care about what I can offer them. They don't really care to know who I am. But you're different. I don't know if I've met anyone who's as disinterested in my success as you." Lila chuckled, a sound that was soft but genuine. "I guess I'm not a fan of the typical world you live in. There's more to life than just business deals and fancy dinners, Kellen. I've spent too much time around people who think they know everything about someone just because of their bank account." Kellen was silent for a moment, her words hanging in the air. He wasn't used to being seen as anything other than the man he had built himself up to be. But with Lila, it was as if he could let go of the armor he wore for the rest of the world. He could just be Kellen. "I get that," he said quietly. "I've spent most of my life building something, but I've never really stopped to think about whether or not it's what I actually want. I've been so focused on the future, I've forgotten how to live in the present." Lila smiled faintly, her gaze softening. "Maybe that's something we can both work on." Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics, books they had enjoyed, places they wanted to visit, the kinds of food they loved. Kellen found himself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in weeks. It wasn't forced, it wasn't fake, it was just two people enjoying each other's company. By the time dessert arrived, Kellen realized he didn't want the night to end. He wasn't ready to say goodbye. There was something about Lila that made him feel grounded in a way he hadn't experienced before. She wasn't interested in his wealth or his power, she just wanted to get to know him. And that, Kellen realized, was exactly what he needed. "So, what happens now?" Lila asked, her voice curious but with a hint of humor. "Are you going to whisk me away in your limo and make me sign an NDA?" Kellen laughed, shaking his head. "I don't think you're the type of woman who'd appreciate that." "I'm definitely not," Lila replied with a teasing smile. "But I appreciate tonight. More than you know." Kellen took a deep breath, his mind still racing with the realization that he wanted more from this. More from her. He hadn't expected to feel this way, but the more time he spent with her, the more he realized how much he wanted to keep her in his life. "I'm glad you came tonight," he said quietly, his gaze locked on hers. "I'm not sure where this is going, but I want to find out." Lila's eyes softened, and she reached out to place her hand over his. "I'm glad I came too. Let's just see where it takes us." Kellen squeezed her hand gently, feeling a sense of calm wash over him. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. He didn't know what the future held, but with Lila by his side, he was ready to face it, one step at a time. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, strategy calls, and endless rounds of conference calls. Kellen's life was as hectic as ever, but something had shifted inside him. As much as he tried to bury the thoughts of Lila beneath the layers of business and responsibility, they kept resurfacing. Every time he glanced at his phone, his mind wandered to the way she had looked at him, the warmth in her voice, the way she made him feel seen in a way that few people ever had. Their last dinner together had left him with a feeling he couldn't shake, a quiet yearning for something more than the life he had built. Lila had made him realize that life wasn't just about climbing to the top, about being the best or the most powerful. There was more to it. He didn't know if it was love yet, but there was something real there, something that went beyond surface-level connections. He found himself thinking about her often, what she was doing, how she was feeling, and if she was feeling the same pull towards him. The truth was, he didn't know what to do with the emotions she had awakened in him. He had always been in control, always the one making the decisions, but with Lila, he felt like he was being swept along in a current that he didn't fully understand. Despite his internal turmoil, he couldn't bring himself to call her again. He didn't want to come off as needy, and he wasn't sure how to navigate this new territory between them. It was strange, this feeling that had taken root in him. The loneliness he had long ago grown accustomed to now seemed more like an echo of a life he was no longer sure he wanted. Kellen was jolted out of his thoughts one morning when his assistant, Mara, entered his office with a file in hand. "Mr. Hayes," she said, her usual calm demeanor slightly off as she set the file on his desk. "I believe you've been sent an invitation." Kellen glanced up, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. He was about to dismiss it until Mara placed the envelope in front of him. His eyes flicked to the name written across it. It was from Lila. His pulse quickened as he tore open the envelope, his heart hammering in his chest as he read the letter inside. "Kellen, I know it's been a few weeks, but I've been thinking about our last conversation. I'd like to meet with you again. I understand if you've been busy, but I think there's something worth exploring between us. If you're open to it, I'll be at the new wine bar on 5th Avenue at 7 p.m. tomorrow. I hope to see you there." A smile tugged at Kellen's lips. He couldn't explain why, but the idea of seeing her again, of spending more time with her, excited him in a way he hadn't expected. The invitation was simple, but it spoke volumes. She hadn't forgotten him, and it seemed she wasn't willing to let this just be another fleeting moment either. He glanced up at Mara, who was watching him intently. "I'll be going to that meeting," he said, his voice firm, though there was an undercurrent of anticipation he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge before. Mara nodded, though her expression suggested she was trying not to smile. "I'll make sure your schedule is clear for tomorrow evening." Kellen spent the rest of the day with a sense of anticipation hanging over him. Despite his best efforts to focus, his mind kept returning to Lila. He wasn't sure what she wanted from him or what this would mean for both of them, but he knew one thing: he wanted to find out. That evening, as Kellen prepared for their meeting, he couldn't help but reflect on everything that had changed in such a short time. His life, once so structured and predictable, now felt uncertain and raw. And for the first time in years, he was okay with that. The wine bar was dimly lit, cozy yet refined, tucked away from the main hustle and bustle of the city. Kellen arrived early, wanting to make a good impression. He stood by the bar, his eyes scanning the room for Lila, though a part of him hoped she would surprise him by appearing in her usual understated way. He didn't want to admit how eager he was to see her, but he couldn't help it. At exactly 7 p.m., she walked in. Lila looked effortlessly chic in a soft, cream-colored sweater, dark jeans, and a leather jacket that gave her an air of nonchalant elegance. She moved with quiet confidence, not seeking attention, but commanding it nonetheless. The moment she saw Kellen, their eyes locked, and a smile broke across her face, a smile that made his chest tighten. She wasn't just beautiful, she was someone who made him feel at ease in a way he never had before. "Hi, Kellen," she said, her voice warm but calm, her smile soft but knowing. "Hi, Lila," he replied, his voice a little deeper than usual, as if his emotions were just beneath the surface. "I'm glad you decided to come." She took a seat across from him, and the waiter immediately arrived to take their order. Kellen ordered a bottle of red wine, something smooth and bold, hoping it would suit the atmosphere of the evening. Lila looked at the menu for a moment before deciding on a light appetizer. They both felt a certain tension in the air, unspoken, but neither of them was in a rush to break the silence. "Thanks for inviting me," Kellen said after a pause, his tone sincere. "I didn't expect to hear from you again after our last dinner. I thought you might have moved on." Lila smiled slightly, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass as she spoke. "I wasn't sure what I was looking for either. But I thought maybe it's worth taking a second chance to find out." Her words hung in the air, and Kellen felt something stir inside him. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to control situations, but Lila was different. She didn't need to be understood in the way everyone else did. She wasn't asking for anything from him, yet at the same time, she was asking him to open up, to let go of the walls he had spent years building around himself. "I don't know if I've ever felt like this," Kellen said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's strange. I've spent so long focusing on my company, on my future. But now I can't seem to think about anything but you." Lila's gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. But it was fleeting. She was in control, as always. "I know what you mean. I've spent my life thinking I could handle everything on my own. But sometimes, you find someone who makes you rethink your priorities. Someone who makes you want to take a chance." Kellen's heart beat a little faster. There was a tenderness in her voice that made him want to say something more, but instead, he just nodded. "I don't know what comes next, Lila. But I want to find out with you." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "Then let's take it slow. One step at a time. I think we can figure this out." The weight of her words settled between them, and for the first time, Kellen felt like he was standing at the beginning of something important. It wasn't about rushing into anything, it was about seeing where this connection could take them. For all the success he had in his life, for all the control he exerted over everything, there was something deeply liberating about the idea of letting go and embracing the unknown. Their dinner passed slowly, each conversation deeper than the last. They didn't rush to fill the silence with meaningless chatter, instead, they let the moments between words speak volumes. By the time dessert arrived, neither of them wanted the evening to end. Kellen looked at Lila, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spreading through him. "I'm glad you decided to come tonight." Lila smiled, her eyes soft. "So am I, Kellen. So am I." As they left the wine bar, Kellen felt a sense of peace that he hadn't expected. He wasn't sure where this was going, or if it would even lead to something more, but he knew that for the first time in years, he was willing to let the future unfold on its own terms. With Lila by his side, the future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. It felt like something worth waiting for. The weeks after their second dinner together passed in a blur of excitement and uncertainty. Kellen couldn't quite explain it, but something about his growing connection with Lila had unsettled him in a way he wasn't used to. He had always been in control of every aspect of his life, his career, his schedule, his emotions. But with her, everything felt different. He found himself distracted during business meetings, his mind often wandering back to their conversations, to the way she had looked at him with such sincerity, such unguardedness. For the first time in a long while, he was starting to wonder if the life he had built, the one he had worked so hard for, was really the life he wanted. Lila had a way of making him question everything. She didn't ask for anything from him, didn't try to impress him with her connections or her knowledge. She simply existed, quietly confident, comfortable in her own skin, and unafraid to be vulnerable. It was like she had unlocked a part of him that he had kept closed off for years, a part that longed for something deeper, something more meaningful than the hollow relationships he had cultivated over the years. They began meeting more frequently, each time in a different setting, quiet cafes, parks, sometimes just walking through the city at night, talking about anything and everything. It wasn't about the places or the things they did, it was about the connection between them. The way she made him feel like he was truly being seen, not for his wealth or status, but for who he was. It was a gift, one that Kellen had never known he needed. But the more time they spent together, the more Kellen began to feel the weight of his own emotions. He was falling for her. There was no other way to put it. He had tried to deny it at first, to convince himself that it was just a passing attraction, but the more he got to know her, the deeper his feelings ran. One evening, a few weeks after their last dinner, Kellen found himself standing on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out at the city below. It was a clear night, the lights of the skyscrapers twinkling in the distance, but Kellen wasn't looking at the view. He was thinking about Lila, about the way her laughter sounded when she told him stories about her childhood, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about the things she loved, the things that truly mattered to her. He had always thought he knew what he wanted, but now, he wasn't so sure. His phone buzzed, breaking him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen and saw a message from Lila. "I was wondering if you're free tonight. There's something I need to tell you." Kellen's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but something in them made him feel uneasy. What did she need to tell him? His mind raced as he typed a quick response, "I'm free." "What time?" 8 p.m. "Same place as last time." Kellen quickly replied, "See you then." He didn't know why, but his stomach churned with nerves. He tried to shake it off, telling himself it was probably nothing. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be different. When he arrived at the wine bar, Lila was already there, sitting at the same table they had shared the first time. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was warm, though there was something in her eyes, something that made Kellen's pulse quicken. She was trying to hide it, but he could see the unease in her gaze. "Hi," he said softly, his voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "You okay?" Lila gave him a small smile, nodding. "I'm fine. I've been thinking a lot about things, and I think it's time I told you something." Kellen sat down across from her, his heart pounding. He could tell that this wasn't just another casual conversation. Something was weighing heavily on her. "What is it?" he asked gently, his tone softening. "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Lila took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. "I've been thinking about us," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I realized that I haven't been completely honest with you." Kellen frowned, his mind racing. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the floor before meeting his again. "When we first met, I told you that I wasn't looking for anything more. But the truth is, I was lying. Not because I didn't like you, but because I didn't want to admit to myself what was happening. What I'm feeling." Kellen leaned forward, his eyes fixed on her. "Lila, if this is about..." She shook her head quickly, cutting him off. "No, it's not about you. It's about me. About the fact that I've spent so much of my life building walls around myself. I've been afraid of letting someone in, afraid of getting hurt. But when I'm with you, I don't feel that fear. I feel something else. Something real." The weight of her words hung between them, and for a moment, Kellen was silent, absorbing what she was saying. He could see the vulnerability in her eyes, the honesty in her voice. He wanted to reach out, to tell her how he felt, but something inside him hesitated. "What do you mean?" he asked softly. "What are you trying to say?" Lila took another deep breath, her hands now clasped together on the table. "I'm saying that I'm scared, Kellen. I'm scared of what this could be. I'm scared of how much I care, and I'm scared that maybe you don't feel the same way. But I can't keep pretending. I've been fighting this, but I'm not anymore." Kellen felt a rush of relief flood through him, though it was mixed with the uncertainty that always followed moments of vulnerability. He had been holding his own feelings back, afraid of saying too much, of exposing the emotions that had been quietly building inside him. But hearing her admit the same things made him realize just how much he wanted this, wanted her. "Lila," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I care about you too. I've been trying to keep it under control, but I don't want to fight it anymore. I've never felt like this before. And I don't want to lose what we have. The words came out more easily than he had expected, and when he saw the softening of Lila's expression, the relief in her eyes, he realized that he had said exactly what he needed to say. Lila smiled, a small, uncertain smile, but it was real. Then why have we been so afraid of this? She asked softly. Why have we been holding back? Kellen's lips twitched into a grin. Because I think we both know what it's like to guard our hearts. But I don't think I can do it anymore, not with you. Lila's smile widened, and for the first time, Kellen felt like the walls he had built around himself were starting to crumble. It wasn't just about letting her in, it was about allowing himself to feel something real, something worth fighting for. They spent the rest of the evening talking, their conversation flowing more easily than it ever had before. There were no more walls between them, no more uncertainty. What had started as something casual, something uncertain, was now becoming something deeper, something that Kellen didn't want to walk away from. As they left the wine bar, Kellen took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. He had always been someone who avoided vulnerability, but with Lila, he realized that it was the only thing that mattered. Let's see where this goes, he said softly, his voice full of quiet determination. Lila looked up at him, her eyes filled with the same quiet certainty. I think I'd like that, she said, her voice full of hope. And for the first time in a long time, Kellen felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The days following their conversation were filled with an unexpected sense of calm for Kellen. It was a calm he hadn't felt in years, a kind of peace that settled into the very core of him. For the first time in a long time, he was no longer consumed by the demands of his company or the overwhelming pressure to succeed. Instead, his thoughts kept drifting back to Lila. Their conversation, the way they had finally opened up to each other, felt like a turning point, not just in their relationship, but in Kellen's life. It wasn't just the vulnerability they had shared, or the admission of feelings they had been holding back. It was the realization that for the first time in his life, Kellen was ready to give up control, to allow someone else in, to embrace the uncertainty of what the future might hold. And in a strange way, that made him feel free. But as much as he tried to focus on the positives, there was still a nagging voice in the back of his mind, reminding him of the complexities that lay ahead. His life wasn't simple. He was a CEO, a man whose every move was scrutinized by the press, whose actions affected the lives of thousands. Lila, though she wasn't in his world in the same way, still had a life of her own, one that came with its own set of challenges and expectations. They both carried baggage from their pasts, and while their connection felt real, Kellen knew that navigating their relationship wouldn't be easy. Lila hadn't opened up much about her past, and though Kellen had learned to be patient, he couldn't help but wonder what she was hiding. There were moments, like the one they shared at the wine bar, when she allowed herself to be vulnerable with him, but there were also times when she pulled away, as if she was afraid to let him too close. It was during one of those moments that Kellen decided he needed to confront her about it. They had spent the day together, walking through the park, talking about their hopes for the future. But the conversation had shifted, and once again, there was that guarded look in her eyes, the one that told Kellen there was more beneath the surface. I don't want to push you, Lila, Kellen said, his voice quiet as they sat on a bench overlooking the water. But I can't help but feel like there's something you're holding back. I can't keep pretending that everything's perfect when I know you're not telling me something. You don't have to tell me everything right now, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. I need to know who you really are. Lila turned her gaze toward the water, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't say anything. Kellen's heart tightened as he watched her, unsure if he had said the right thing. But when she finally spoke, her voice was low and steady. It's not that I'm hiding something from you, Kellen, she began, her eyes meeting his, it's just that I've always kept things to myself. I've learned to do that over the years. People like you, people who live in the spotlight, they don't understand what it's like to have to keep so much to yourself. I've built walls around my life because I had to. I've been afraid that if I let someone in, they would just leave. Her words hit Kellen like a punch to the gut. He hadn't realized how much pain she had been carrying, how much she had kept hidden for so long. It made sense now, why she was so hesitant, why she was always holding back. She wasn't afraid of him, she was afraid of being vulnerable again, of allowing herself to be hurt. "I don't want to hurt you, Lila," Kellen said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not asking you to let me in all at once. But I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him, her eyes softening, and for a moment, Kellen thought she might cry. Instead, she took a deep breath, a tear slipping down her cheek, but she quickly wiped it away. "I know," she whispered. I've never allowed myself to trust anyone like this before. It scares me. But I'm willing to try. For you." Kellen reached out, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her skin. It was such a simple gesture, but it meant the world to him. In that moment, he knew they were standing on the edge of something that could change both of their lives forever. And though he was still afraid of opening himself up to someone again, afraid of what the future might hold, he realized that he didn't want to be afraid anymore. He didn't want to run from this. Not with her. "We'll take it one step at a time," Kellen said, his voice steady, his hand still holding hers. "No rush. We'll do this together. And whatever happens, we'll face it together." Lila smiled faintly, her hand tightening around his. "Together," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. It felt like a promise, unspoken but understood between them. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but full of unspoken emotions, hope, fear, and a shared understanding that they were both willing to take a chance on each other. For the first time in a long time, Kellen didn't feel like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. With Lila, he could breathe. They spent the rest of the afternoon walking around the city, hand in hand, talking about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. It was the kind of conversation Kellen had never allowed himself to have before. He had always kept his emotions locked away, focused solely on work and success, but with Lila, it felt different. She made him realize that there was more to life than just building an empire. There was more to life than control. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Kellen felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but for the first time, he was okay with the uncertainty. They didn't need to have all the answers. They didn't need to know what the future would bring. All that mattered was that they were willing to try. As they stood by the water, watching the last rays of sunlight dip below the horizon, Kellen turned to Lila. "I'm glad you came into my life, Lila," he said, his voice low but sincere. Lila smiled, her eyes sparkling with something he couldn't quite place. "I'm glad, too," she replied softly. They stood there for a while, the sounds of the city fading into the background, just the two of them, wrapped in the quiet comfort of each other's presence. And in that moment, Kellen knew that he had found something real, something worth fighting for. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Kellen. The connection with Lila had deepened in ways he hadn't expected. Every time they saw each other, they seemed to uncover new layers of their personalities, revealing more about themselves than they had ever shared with anyone before. It was easy with her. It wasn't like the superficial relationships he'd had in the past, where he felt like he had to put on a mask to be accepted. With Lila, he felt like he could just be himself, and that sense of comfort was something he hadn't experienced in years. But even as their relationship blossomed, Kellen couldn't escape the doubts that lingered at the back of his mind. They were both still figuring things out. Lila had been hesitant from the start, clearly carrying her own baggage from past experiences, and Kellen understood that. He had his own walls, he had built them to protect himself, to keep from getting hurt. But as the days passed, he realized how much he was willing to let those walls crumble. He didn't want to hold back anymore. One afternoon, a few weeks after their last conversation, Kellen found himself waiting for Lila in his apartment. They had planned to spend the day together, but Kellen had been dealing with an urgent issue at work that had taken longer than expected. He couldn't help but feel a little frustrated with himself. He had promised Lila that this weekend would be different. It would be about them, no work, no distractions. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. He quickly stood up, walking over to open the door. There she was, Lila, looking effortlessly beautiful as always, dressed in a casual but elegant dress and a light sweater, her hair falling softly around her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him, and for a moment, the tension in his chest melted away. "Hi," Lila said, her voice warm. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was terrible, but it looks like you've been busy." Kellen smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, I had to handle something with the company, but it's taken care of now. I'm glad you're here." He stepped aside, letting her into the apartment. Lila gave him a gentle smile, her eyes searching his face as she walked inside. "I understand. You're always working. But I like that you still make time for me, even when things are crazy." He closed the door behind her, taking a deep breath. "I don't know how I've managed to get so caught up in all of it. It's like my whole world revolves around work. But with you," he trailed off, unsure of how to express what he was feeling. It was hard to put into words, the way she made him feel like he could breathe again. She tilted her head slightly, her gaze soft. "I know what you mean. Sometimes I think I've spent so much time avoiding things that matter, trying to protect myself, that I've forgotten what it feels like to be open with someone." Kellen reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I don't want you to feel like you have to protect yourself anymore, Lila. You can let me in. I'm not going anywhere." Her expression faltered for a moment, and Kellen could see the walls she had built around herself flickering in her eyes. She took a deep breath, looking at him as though trying to make a decision. Then, finally, she reached for his hand, her fingers lightly wrapping around his. "I'm scared, Kellen," she admitted quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Scared of what this could be, scared of letting myself believe it's real." Kellen's heart tightened, and he gently pulled her toward him, wrapping his arms around her in a warm embrace. "You don't have to be scared. We're in this together. We're figuring it out, step by step." They stood like that for a moment, the world outside disappearing as they simply held each other. Kellen could feel the warmth of her body against his, the steady rhythm of her breath, and he realized that this was the moment when everything had shifted. They were no longer just two people getting to know each other. They were partners in this, willing to take the next step together. When they finally pulled apart, Lila looked up at him with a soft, uncertain smile. "What happens next?" she asked, her voice full of vulnerability. Kellen brushed his thumb across her cheek, his heart swelling with emotion. "We take it one day at a time. I'm not in a hurry to rush this. I just want to see where it goes." Lila nodded, her eyes searching his. "I think I'm ready to find out." They spent the rest of the evening together, talking, laughing, and enjoying the quiet moments that Kellen had always taken for granted. For once, he wasn't thinking about the next meeting or the next deal, he was present, living in the moment with Lila. They didn't need anything extravagant. All they needed was each other. As the night grew late, Lila leaned her head against Kellen's shoulder, her voice soft as she spoke. "You know, I've spent so much of my life trying to avoid situations like this, thinking that love and connection would just complicate everything. But now that I'm here, with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even know I was looking for." Kellen kissed the top of her head, his heart full. "I feel the same way, Lila. I never expected this. But I'm glad it's happening." They didn't need to say more. The words had already been spoken in their actions, in the way they looked at each other, in the trust they were building. Over the next few weeks, their relationship continued to grow, both of them taking things at their own pace, understanding that they didn't need to rush into anything. There were moments of doubt, of course. Kellen still carried his fears, his need for control. And Lila, while she was opening up more and more, still struggled with her past, her fears of being hurt again. But every time they faced those fears together, they grew stronger. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Kellen's apartment, watching the city lights flicker below, Lila turned to him, her expression serious. "Kellen, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been thinking about for a while." Kellen looked at her, concern flickering in his chest. "What is it, Lila? You know you can tell me anything." She took a deep breath, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been offered a job. A big one. It's in another city, and it would require me to leave everything behind here, my life, my friends, everything." Kellen's heart sank. The thought of her leaving wasn't something he had prepared for, but he tried to keep his voice steady. "And, what are you going to do?" Lila met his gaze, her eyes searching his face as though she were looking for some sort of sign. "I don't know yet. It's a big opportunity. It could change everything for me. But I don't want to make a decision without knowing where we stand." Kellen felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He had known this day might come, but it didn't make it any easier to hear. The thought of her leaving felt like a blow, but he refused to let fear dictate his response. "I don't want you to leave because of me, Lila," Kellen said, his voice thick with emotion. "I want you to follow your dreams, whatever they may be. But I also want you to know that I'm here. And if you decide to stay, I'll be here, too." Lila's eyes softened, and she reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I'm not sure what the right decision is yet. But I promise you, Kellen, I'll figure it out. And when I do, I'll be honest with you. I'll always be honest with you." Kellen nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "That's all I can ask for." They didn't have all the answers, and they didn't know what the future would bring. But in that moment, Kellen realized that the uncertainty didn't scare him as much as it used to. With Lila by his side, he knew they could face whatever came their way, together. As the night continued and the city lights sparkled in the distance, Kellen held Lila close, feeling the warmth of her against him. And for the first time, he felt like he had everything he needed. The weeks that followed felt like a turning point for both Kellen and Lila. They had reached a level of openness, of understanding, that neither of them had anticipated when they first met. Every day was a new discovery, not just about each other, but about themselves. Kellen was learning to let go of the control he had held so tightly to for years, and Lila was beginning to trust again, allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she hadn't done in a long time. They were growing together, but that didn't mean the road ahead was without its challenges. Kellen's life was still filled with board meetings, investors, and constant decisions that affected thousands of people. But now, with Lila in his life, he was learning to balance the weight of his responsibilities with the tenderness of their relationship. He found himself looking forward to the moments when he could steal away from the chaos of his empire, to spend a quiet evening with her, to laugh and talk about things that had nothing to do with business. It was refreshing, grounding even, to have someone who cared about him, not for what he could give her, but simply for who he was. Lila, on the other hand, was coming to terms with the offer that had been put before her, a life-changing job in another city, a new chapter that would require her to leave behind everything she had known in New York. She had thought long and hard about it, weighed the pros and cons, and though the opportunity was incredibly tempting, it felt like the final test in her journey toward letting go of the walls she had spent years building around her heart. She had always believed that if she kept her distance, kept her emotions at bay, she could protect herself from the inevitable pain of losing someone she loved. But now, with Kellen, things were different. She had told him about the offer a few weeks ago, and he had been nothing but supportive, but Lila knew that the longer they spent together, the harder the decision would become. She had never expected to feel so strongly about someone, and now, the thought of leaving him was almost unbearable. It wasn't just the city or the job that mattered, it was the life they had begun to build together. But the fear of making the wrong decision, of regretting the path she chose, gnawed at her. One evening, after a particularly trying day at work, Lila found herself sitting alone on the balcony of her apartment, the city lights twinkling below her. She had been quiet for the past few days, retreating into herself as she struggled with the decision that loomed over her. Kellen had noticed it, of course. He always did. But he had given her space, something she appreciated more than she could say. The door behind her opened, and she didn't need to look to know it was him. She felt his presence even before he spoke. "Lila," Kellen said softly, his voice steady but filled with concern. "You've been quiet. What's on your mind?" Lila took a deep breath, her hands gripping the railing as she stared out at the horizon. She had known this conversation was coming, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure how to put her feelings into words. "I don't know what to do, Kellen," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "This job, it's everything I've worked for. It's the kind of opportunity that doesn't come around often. But the more I think about it, the more I realize how much I'll be leaving behind. You. This life we've started building together. I don't know if I can walk away from that." Kellen stepped closer, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. She leaned into the touch, taking comfort in the warmth of his hand, even as her heart ached with the weight of the decision she was facing. "I don't want you to feel like you have to choose between your dreams and me," Kellen said, his voice low and sincere. "You have every right to pursue the life you want, the career you've worked so hard for. I want you to do what's best for you, Lila. But I also want you to know that I'm here. Whatever you decide, I'm here." Tears welled up in Lila's eyes, and she quickly wiped them away, not wanting to appear weak. But the truth was, she felt vulnerable in that moment, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," she said quietly, turning to face him. "Someone who understands me, who doesn't push me to choose. I've spent so long building walls around my life, around my heart. And now, I'm not sure what to do with all of this." She gestured between them, her hands trembling slightly. "I don't want to lose what we have, Kellen. But I also don't want to regret not taking this opportunity." Kellen's heart tightened, and he took her hands in his, gently holding them. "Lila, you don't have to decide right now. We have time. What matters is that you feel like you're making the right choice for yourself. You don't owe me anything. I want you to be happy, to follow your passions. If you stay, that's great. But if you go, I'll still be here for you. Because what we have isn't just about geography or circumstances. It's about who we are together. And that doesn't change, no matter where we are." Lila's breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words settling over her like a blanket. She hadn't realized just how much she had been holding on to the fear of making the wrong choice, of losing him in the process. But Kellen was right. He had never asked her to choose him over her career. He had never put that pressure on her. He simply wanted her to be herself, to be the person she had always wanted to be, with or without him. "I'm not sure what's next, Kellen," Lila whispered, her voice filled with uncertainty. "But I know that I want to figure it out with you. Whatever happens, I want you to be part of my life. I'm not ready to give up on us. I'm not ready to walk away from what we have." Kellen pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as though he never wanted to let go. "We'll figure it out, Lila. Together. No matter where life takes us, we'll face it side by side." For a long moment, they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, the city below them a silent witness to the quiet promise they had just made. In that moment, neither of them needed words. They knew what they meant to each other, and that was enough. The decision wasn't going to be easy. There were still obstacles to overcome, fears to face, and uncertainties to navigate. But in that moment, they both understood something important: love wasn't about having all the answers. It was about showing up, day after day, ready to face whatever came next, together. As the night stretched on, Lila leaned against Kellen, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. It was a rhythm that felt like home. And for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to step forward into the unknown. She wasn't afraid of what the future might bring, because with Kellen by her side, she knew they could handle anything. The next chapter of their lives was still unfolding, but Lila was ready to walk through it, hand in hand with him. And that, she realized, was all she really needed.